Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 15th of March 2024. The second attempt at this. I'm struggling with my words today. I have been for the last few days actually, so I had to start again because I just couldn't find a word. Nonetheless, we'll start with the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them in the description to the video below. 580 personnel lost in a day is not the highest. In fact, that's around about average at the moment, over the course of the whole war, that is. 1 tank, 11 APVs, 15 artillery systems, 34 vehicles and fuel tanks, and then 3 pieces of special equipment. So we are seeing some fairly low numbers, relatively speaking, compared to the last week or so. And as I keep saying, statistics tell a story, and the story is probably going to be something like the Russians not attacking as forcefully in a number of places that they have been previously. Maybe they are running a little short on momentum and resources, or maybe have something else up their sleeves, but it looks like things are calming down a little bit, and that's reflected in these numbers. However, General Syrskyi, the Ukrainian commander, has said that the Russians are trying to break through in Avdiivka still, and that is a major concern for them. But nonetheless, lower numbers here. Now, I was having, well, not really a discussion. Another Russian troll sort of accused me, or accused the General Staff figures of just being complete nonsense, yada, yada, yada. And of course, there's a kind of whataboutery of the Russian figures being abject nonsense, like physically impossible. But just to remind the viewers, and I've said this 100 times, that the personnel stats, okay, probably have the most reason to think that they might not be 100% accurate because they rely on an awful lot of guesstimation. But there are still protocols and criteria that the units have to go through to submit their figures up the chain of command. So there is, first of all, there is a protocol. There is, these aren't just plucked out of people's backsides. And then second, but we're also going to come and talk about how NATO has pretty much confirmed, or at least stated that those numbers that the Ukrainian General Staff figures are broadly correct. So NATO have come out, as I say, we'll come to this in a second, and said that recent figures for Russian losses have been much worse, as in they've taken some really heavy losses over the last, I don't know what recent means for them, but let's assume month or two. And they've stated that the Russians have lost 350,000 personnel. So actually, that's the Ukrainian figure, although that's another 80,000 on top, is not like nuts out of the park. This is vaguely close to what NATO is saying, and they claim that they're using their own intelligence sources to state that claim. So, in other words, I think we've got fairly good reason to believe that the personnel figures are at least somewhat accurate. And when it comes to the equipment losses, the Ukrainians have got, or the General Staff have got a much better chance of being accurate. There's far less guesstimation going on. So when you're talking about personnel loss, you're like, well, how many people were in that truck? How many people were in that dugout? How many people were in that IFE? Don't know. So we're going to kind of have some kind of guess at that. How many people have died or been injured? Don't know, but I think it's probably this number. That's your guessing. But when it comes to the IFE, it's there on the camera for you. It's like, we've blown that up. How do we know? Because here on the video it's blown up. So that's at least damage, and that ain't going anywhere. And so when it comes to equipment, I think the General Staff figures are far more accurate. And I think we've got a good justification believing them. And part of that justification comes down to people like Oryx, War Spotting, and in this case Andrew Perpetua, who does this tireless work with his team to not only find all this stuff but geolocate it. And every one of these vehicles that is listed here has a corresponding URL so you can go and have a look at the actual source data. Now, on days like today, where, as you can see, the General Staff is saying actually not much stuff has been lost, there's often a lag between what the General Staff claim and then that filtering through onto the socials so you can see it. And remember, you are not going to see everything on the socials. As I've said many times before, there are drone pilots who don't upload stuff to the internet for your delectation, right? Constantine, who works with Andrew Perpetual, that does a lot of live streaming with him, said once recently that he had fundraised for a unit, a drone for that unit, and then met the guy or spoke to the guy like many months later. It's like, oh, I forgot I donated a drone to you guys. How's it going? And the guy said, oh, we've destroyed loads of stuff. And Constantine was like, okay, let's have a look. Where's it on the internet? He's like, oh, I haven't put any of it up. So that's one unit or one guy who's responsible. I don't know how many bits of equipment, but it was a lot of equipment, and not one of it had been uploaded to the internet. And so therefore, there will be a difference between verified losses from like drone footage and whatnot, and what you see the general staff claim. But what we try and do is paint a picture we're not trying to paint a picture that they are accurate. We are trying to paint a picture of what's going on and see if that tracks with the Ukrainian general staff figures. And I maintain that it really does. So a day like today, just phenomenal Russian losses here. I don't know, at least 10-1 Russian to Ukrainian losses. And value of mass has its own kind of, quantity has its own quality. And in this case, that quality is the value of this stuff, not only in replacement value, but also in what this stuff does functionally. And so if that stuff is destroyed or abandoned or damaged and is unable to be used, then the Russians are unable to do the thing that that piece of equipment would do. Or at least have to then scramble about, get another piece of equipment, and things are more inefficient, and arguably they just can't do some of the stuff they would want to do. Right, we go to the Ukrainian losses first. A couple of tanks, an FV-103 Spartan, that's an old British APC, a couple other bits and pieces, and that's it. Like, one of those is a Free Russian Legion tank up in the north of Ukraine, to the north of Ukraine. And when it comes to the Russian losses, there's nothing particularly high value. There's a Mi-8 helicopter, which I think, and Borisov Glebsk 2 electronic warfare system that's very likely destroyed by Gimlers. Those are high value, but the rest is just normal equipment. But, that Mi-8, I think it's probably the one at Sochi airport as opposed to the one full of gold miners that went down in the middle of Russia. I assume that that's the case, but I don't know, to be honest. But even with all of this stuff, okay, a bunch of loaves. These are Bukankas, not crazy valuable, but when you're losing 15 of them in one day, or at least loaded up on one day, these could all be from weeks previously as a unit uploads lots of them at one time. So you got night vision drone, etc., etc. So that's probably all one bit of footage, different timestamps for that footage. And that will tell you that it's a unit uploading all of what they've done, maybe over a week. But if that's happening every day, different units uploading every day, then even though you'll get spikes like this, it'll all kind of iron itself out. So eventually you can kind of say that it does happen on a daily basis, because one unit puts 10 on that day, another unit puts 10 the next day, another unit puts 10 the next day. And that unit might not have done 10 the day before, but another unit will have done. So in other words, it's all fairly accurate as a kind of time snapshot. Anyway, let's go and look at the Russian losses outside of those two high ones there. So the Mi-8 and the electronic warfare system, you've got surveillance and comms, you've got a couple of boats, some artillery, nothing particularly expensive or decent there. A number of different tanks. But of course, you keep losing those, and you feel it eventually. And then you get to the infantry fighting vehicle category, and my goodness, they've lost a lot here. So BMP 1s, 2s, and 3s, and BTR 82s, a whole range of them. We've got APCs, not a crazy amount, but a few. And then trucks and civilian vehicles, the Bukankas, SUVs, the pickups, the Kamaz trucks, the Ural military trucks. And then we've got the Desert Cross 1000-3, those Chinese golf carts that have been sold to Russia. Starting to see a number of those every day being lost. So this is a really significant day of losses. The Russians have taken a hit there, and I expect mainly in terms of logistics for them. Then when it comes, we're going to go back to that personnel claim. So the NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg revealed that recent NATO estimates show a notable increase in Russia's losses in Ukraine. He disclosed that Western intelligence services indicate the number of killed and wounded Russian soldiers has surpassed 350,000, and it's increased significantly recently. He said the number of killed and wounded is based on data from Western intelligence sources. The question might then be, well, where do they get their data from? Really, are they just looking at... I mean, it's not like you've got like a British intelligence person walking the fields of Ukraine counting bodies. And so essentially we must question whether their base data set is from the Ukrainian General Staff, and whether it's unsurprising that they would conclude similarly. But I guess they'll be doing work to do some fact checking, like, okay, how are they compiling these figures? Are we justified in believing them? So it's not a case of going out and counting bodies themselves, but actually having intelligence within the framework of the General Staff to calculate whether what the General Staff are doing is an accurate process and gives decent enough numbers. And I presume that's what's been taking place. Right. As mentioned, Syrskyi has said that things are tough in Avdiivka, or at least the Russians are still concentrating in that area. But he said that the invaders are losing fighters and equipment in alarming numbers. And then this goes back to what NATO is stating, that recently there's been a big uptick, and goes back to Andrew Perpetua's numbers, and it goes back to the General Staff numbers on previous days. So yes, all of the evidence points to the justification that Russia are losing phenomenal numbers on the front line. Okay, but that's not to say the Ukrainians aren't, of course, and Ukrainians can ill afford to lose any. Right, on top of that, and I did report this yesterday, a group of Russian soldiers surrendered to the Russia Volunteer Corps in Spodierezhne, or whatever that word is, in just to the north of Ukraine, in Belgorod and Kursk area. There are losses there. There was a picture that came out. I can't show you the image or the video, in fact. So the Russians released a picture of a bunch of bodies lying down with tape on that's north of the border. And it looks like there was some kind of artillery hit or something near a whole load of those Free Russia fighters. That's what I'm going to call them now, Free Russia fighters. So that looked terrible, and the claim was, look, all these are dead. And then a video subsequently came out to show a bunch of them moving, actually. So I think they have been hit, and there probably was a number of them dead, but a number of them were also moving. So it wasn't like all of those people. There is probably sort of 20 plus people there, but it's not as bad as the Russians claim. However, it does go to show that those north of the border are finding it tough fighting against the Russians, as you'd expect. They've gone into Russia, but it's still going on. And then there's lots more footage coming out. You know, you can click on these links. They're in the description below. 79th Brigade targeting abandoned Russian AFVs on the Novomykhailivka front. So there's a equipment graveyard around Novomykhailivka. There's equipment graveyards around all the way around Avdiivka. Also, I think, well, really down that eastern front, you can talk Marinka, Krasnohorivka, you can talk Vuhledar, and then even across the Rabitna, they're losing an awful lot of stuff, the Russians, and then down into Krinky and along the left bank of the Dnipro River. So, yeah, very, very costly for the Russians. Right. During the night, Ukraine was attacked with 8 missiles. I don't know anything about the 8 missiles. 27 Shahed drones were all shot down, so 100% interception rate is really good. But there were 8 missiles, and I presume there would be ballistic missiles that the Ukrainians would have trouble striking, intercepting. They were destroyed, it says, next to the Shaheeds, that is, in Kirovorad, Mykolaiv, Kharkiv, Kherson, Khmelnytsky, Vinnytsia, and Kiev. Now, in Vinnytsia, we know that the resultant debris falling from the Shaheeds caused quite a lot of problem there. Which is, you know, as the tragedy in Vinnytsia was through falling debris, but we don't know how much worse or better it may have been otherwise. And that's a problem. What goes up must come down. That even if they have 100% success rate in striking, in intercepting these Shaheeds, if they intercept them vaguely over the target area or near urban areas, and that falls down on a residential building. And it's you can ask the question: which would have been worse, allowing it to hit its final target, or shooting it down over a residential area? So it's really difficult stuff especially when you've got waves of these things. And then talking about residential areas, Russia continues to increasingly focus its war effort on residential areas with zero military objectives. I don't know if that's 100% true. I would question that. I think Russians probably have picked up on doing more successful attacks on military industrial complex infrastructure. But they are also hitting a lot of residential stuff too, it must be said. Overnight, Russians sent an Iranian drone 700 kilometers distance to residential area of Vinnytsia, destroying the building, killing 2. And again, I would claim, let's be honest here, that's probably air defense shooting that down. And it has to be. It was either the Ukrainians didn't intercept all 100% of the Shaheeds, or they did. And if they did, then this is a result of air defense shooting down that drone. Right, now, as has been hinted at already, prosecutors in Ukraine are saying that Russia has launched around 50 North Korean missiles at Ukraine. Now, interestingly, that came out last night, and this morning, this turns up. Channels in Odessa publish fragments of a missile, which they say is a North Korean. It is unconfirmed, but the idea is that's a North Korean missile in Odessa. So there seems to be at least some evidence to suggest that is the case, that the North Koreans are doing that. Now, one of the biggest bits of footage that came out, I'd love to show it to you, but I can't because I'll get in trouble. But another oil refinery was hit in Kaluga, just to the southwest of Moscow, and this was a significant bang, and it was caught effectively, not live, but somebody caught it, and it's lit up like a Christmas tree, the oil refinery, which I find pretty interesting anyway. And then bang, there is a huge explosion. Don't know what the long-term damage to that is, but that's another refinery getting hit. And then drones were spotted around Bertolinovka in the Voronezh region. There was a military airfield 4 kilometers away from here, and there was a big bang over there. I don't know whether that's something being shot down or whether that's a drone hitting its target. It's a second raid on that area in the last 2 days, so it could be some further damage. As no report says, a military airbase is located, and it seems the moment of impact is captured on video. Damage done is still unknown. So as ever with these things, we wait to see the information filter through. Now we're going to go to Belgorod, and the simple fact of the matter, as far as I'm concerned, is I don't know what's going on in Belgorod, quite frankly, and north of the border. There's just all sorts happening. I don't know what's causing destruction in Belgorod. The Russians are claiming RM-70 missiles are being fired into Belgorod. There's claims of shelling, claims of this and that. I don't know whether it's air defences shooting stuff down or what. It seems bizarre that the Free Russia fighters would just lob ordnance into the middle of Belgorod, but who knows? What is happening at the moment is that there are air raids, and I'm going to play these to you for a reason. Now, I've experienced air raids in Ukraine, and it's quite unnerving stuff. It is pretty horrible to live under those conditions. Especially if it's not something that you've experienced consistently, like say people in Kiev, where actually air raids you might get normalized to that. I'm playing you that because those people in Belgorod, those Russians, will be feeling the heat of the war, and they'll be pretty unnerved. I'm now going to play you a Russian propagandist who did this some time ago on national TV in Russia, taking the piss out of Ukraine and air raid sirens in Ukraine. And look at those sniggering monsters. Oh, that's so funny. Oh, air raids, people dying. Oh. So, yeah, just it's horrible. Whether it's in Belgorod or Kiev, no one likes to hear that sound because that is a threat to civilian lives. I'm interested on your idea of what you think is going on in terms of particularly Belgorod as a fairly large city that is receiving some attention from different quarters, right? Russian Ministry of Defense reports that the city of Belgorod is being hit with RM-70 multiple rocket launcher rockets again. Yesterday, 2 Russians were allegedly killed and at least 19 were injured in the region, the ministry claims. So that's coming from the Russians. But of course, there is burning stuff there. As Dead District here says, Russian air defense hit Belgorod again. But is that true? Who knows? I'd be interested in what your opinion of what's going on there is. Now, I'm going to talk to this idea that the Ukrainians have suffered some really heavy losses in terms of high value equipment, and the Russians have been able to do some good ISTAR, so intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition and reconnaissance deep into Ukrainian territory, and have hit time sensitive targets in a way they were unable to much earlier on in the war. Some people have said on my threads, isn't it a coincidence that they're starting to use Starlink at the moment and now they're hitting stuff? So could it be down to Starlink? Could it be down to this? Some people saying, it's only happened since Zelensky's gone, so therefore it's Syrskyi's fault. And I fully don't believe that's the case at all. And I think this is about Russian adaptation. So I reached out to Erland and Danielle from Turchny to just see what they had to say. And actually, Erland said this. It has to do with 2 things. But again, this is going to be a large part speculation on his part, so do take it with a pinch of salt. But he says, 1, they have more and better surveillance drones and more personnel with experience using them. So if you think at the beginning of the war, the experience of using those long-distance drones and the experience of firing missiles and the experience of that whole setup of not having been in that kind of war before, you're going to not be operating at your best right at the beginning of the war, right? Naturally, you're going to improve as time goes on. And you're going to get more people in and more people trained up to requisite levels. 2, the most important point, they changed the authorities, I think, sometime in early 2023. Basically, they allowed for lower level echelons to shoot or be supported by long range shooters. This didn't mean much until their weapons production picked up, which the combination of the 2 you're seeing now, I think. So that is to say, I believe a bit like the idea of NCOs in NATO armed forces have more decision capabilities lower down the hierarchy of command, so you can react much more quickly, dynamically to situations on the battlefield. You don't have to wait till centralized command says do this or do that, or you can't do this, you can't do that. That's one of the big criticisms of the Soviet era army. Well, actually, that might well be an issue with being able to spot, do the intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance and target acquisition, and then act on that with lower down. You're not waiting for someone to give you permission to shoot that missile, and by the time you got that permission, the time sensitive target has moved on, right? So that's, I think, what Erland is saying here. Also, there's been a gradual improvement in Russian targeting throughout 2023. So just all these things gradually coming together means that you get to this point where suddenly, like a year and a half ago, they would have shot at those things but missed them, or just missed that target window to fire at, for example, those Patriot launchers or whatever it would have been a year and a half ago. Now they can just about do it, and then they end up doing it. So the margins are probably quite small, but it has a massive effect. That we see more high value targets destroyed now could be a combination of the 2 factors mentioned above, and this is absolutely on point, taking significant more risks because they are forced to. So I don't know, it's because, forced to, as in the Russians are hitting with aviation bombs and causing all untold havoc up and down the front lines. So they're bringing stuff forward to try and take those things out. And that's becoming, that comes with its own risks. And of course it does. And we knew that. It's like, and I said previously that I would take that risk. I would sink losing a couple of Patriot launchers to take out a load of Russian planes, definitely. And importantly, the pilots. Starlink can have an effect on some comms, yes, but this is a very minor thing in the big picture. And I think that's really useful. So thanks to Erlen for sharing that with us. And hopefully that gives a little bit of clarity. Again, it is speculation, but yeah, I think that's useful. Right. General Syrskyi has said Russia is trying to break through in the Avdiivka direction. Ukraine facing intense artillery fire there. Russian forces are concentrating their main efforts on making a breakthrough near Avdiivka, and that includes them being supported by intense artillery fire and a work of FPV drones. So the Russians are really, really working hard in that region. Then, just to remind you that Syrskyi's also got this rotation in place. So hopefully we'll be starting to see rotation of units on the front line, which is really important for the Ukrainians there. The outcome of the war in Ukraine will be decided this spring and summer, according to EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell. So Josep Borrell has been very much involved in supporting Ukraine from within the EU, and he's held meetings in Washington, and Sky News reports that actually now's your key time. Now in summer, this whole war is going to be decided both now and in summer, and that's going to be a lot depending on what the EU do to support Ukraine and what the US does or doesn't do to support Ukraine. Russian Volunteer Corps has managed to gain a foothold in Kazinka, according to Russian military correspondents. The Russians also write the most massive drone attack on the Russian Federation is expected at night. So that was last night. So Kazinka, under a lot of pressure from the Free Russia fighters. There was a drone attack last night. I don't know that it is as massive as they were expecting. There are explosions and things happening all the time north of the border. This is a quick recap of what's happening in Belgorod and Kursk, says Tim White. Yesterday, the rebel Russian groups raiding from Ukrainian territory once again entered border villages and told Russians to leave, with the humanitarian corridor open until this morning. Belgorod, as you can see there, big explosion. Last night, Belgorod's governor assured everyone he went to the affected villages and there were no enemy troops in there, claiming fighting was continuing outside the region. Some evacuated, but not many, it seems, as the legions united against Putin resumed the attack. So Russians playing it down, or being accurate, who knows. Belgorod officials claim they shot down numerous MLRS missiles, which cannot be verified. So if these are RM-70 missiles, then the Russians are claiming they're shooting them down. Then if they're landing in Belgorod, then there is a large possibility that is indeed a air defense missile, the ramifications of using air defense. What we can see is smoke and damage on the Russian streets. 2 injuries are reported so far. So that kind of stuff is continuing. I just don't have a definite handle on exactly what's going on. The Telegram channel Hungarian Beekeeper says Kaczynski village is under the Russian Volunteer Corps and LSR. That's a Legion of Free Russia, or Freedom Legion of Russia. They're also trying to liberate the village of Nekotivka. That's where they lost the tank to the mine and the checkpoint there. So all those same places are still seeing lots of activity. Right, moving on to the Russian presidential election that's taking place this week. And the reason I've put it in this order is because the activity taking place north of the border is entirely designed to unnerve the Russians in general, the Russian voters, to annoy Putin and to not give him the, hey, look how amazing I am. This is the election weekend. Please vote for me because Russia is awesome. When you've got an invasion into Russia. So I think there's going to be a lot of downplaying from Russian sources of what's going on north of the border, naturally for propaganda reasons. But this is some absolutely brilliant timing from these people, because the election weekend is now, and there are explosions going on in Belgorod. I just think that's really significant. It'd be fascinating to know how the Russian TV stations are reporting what's going on with the Free Russia fighters. I imagine they are barely reporting it at all. But of course, social media does wonders. Right, so we move on to the Russian election. It's the election weekend. And this is pretty fascinating. Of course, I can't confirm this. This is just a random video. But it appears that the Russians are using disappearing ink in the pens at the ballot boxes. I wonder why they would have disappearing ink. So here's someone who's ticked their ballot paper and has filmed themselves then putting a lighter near it. And look at that. I wonder what that will enable. Oh, it means that you can doctor voting sheets. Of course you can. And then people say, but let's check those ballots. It's not the electronic issue here. We've got, yeah, you can check the ballots. Here you go. Oh yeah, they look kosher. Yeah, because we did that. And then you've got this weird scenario. Even the Americans love our Putin, as cardboard Tucker Carlsons are posted at Russian polling stations today to legitimize Putin's election. You've got this weird situation where you've got Putin cutouts at, I think this is in Tumen. This is a bloody voting polling station, and yet we've got like music going on and Tucker Carlson, cardboard cutout. It's insane, absolutely insane. But I think that tells you all you need to know about what Tucker Carlson has done for Russia and where the Russians see him and how they see him, and basically how I see Tucker Carlson. I see Tucker Carlson as the Russians see him, which is an ally to Russia and an ally to Putin, a direct ally to Putin. And then you've got this. So, okay, this is anecdotal, and you might get the same in other countries as well. But just to have a look at some of these videos. Okay, crazy old woman. Crazy Russians. Okay, and fair enough, ha ha ha, you have some fun at the poll stations and, nuts people and woman that seems crazy for Putin or whatever. But just remember that should be seen in this context, that in occupied territories of Ukraine that the Russians are occupying, it's not all face paint and laughing. It's not all happiness and joy at voting. You've got someone with a gun standing behind you. Just an interesting juxtaposition there, because that's what freedom looks like in Russia. Right. I can't go a day without either having a go at Trump or Musk, but my goodness, this is freaking fascinating. This is a Musk one. So remember when Elon Musk announced that creators from the whole political spectrum are welcome on X, after which he offered a show to Tucker Carlson, and that show has been a platform for pro-Putin propaganda, and that Elon Musk has platformed Tucker Carlson to do that. So the show, after Tucker Carlson was sacked from Fox for basically all the stuff for lying and admittedly lying about election fraud to his audience, and that's been proven by the messages he shared behind the scenes, admitting to basically lying, just in case you want to doubt that. It's from Tucker's own pen. Actually, they sacked him because he was slagging off their board members, and is really why I think they sacked him. But anyway, he was sacked from Fox News and then went to Twitter, or X, where Elon Musk gave him this platform to share propaganda. Okay. And then after that, he announced another. So that's a TV show. So his TV show is on Twitter. It's a Twitter show. So sometime later, Twitter announced another content partnership with cultist Tulsi Gabbard. So this is a former Democrat that's gone right wing, is now basically a Trumpian supporter. So that's interesting. Then he got a lot of hassle for just platforming the right wing. So then he did a really interesting thing. So I don't know if you know, CNN's Don Lemon, who was at CNN for 17 years, he was a pretty decent journalist, but he also said some pretty dodgy stuff recently and had some spats with co-workers that didn't put him in a good light. Anyway, he was kind of fired from CNN. So he was picked up by Elon Musk recently and said, right, I'm going to give you a show on Twitter. right? And the first guest is going to be me, Elon Musk. So just so he wouldn't look too much far right leaning, he then announced a partnership with CNN's Don Lemon. First guest on Don's show was, of course, Elon Musk himself. And Don didn't pull any punches. He asked about Elon's ketamine use, so all the rumors about him using ketamine, and criticised the platform, Twitter. And what happened, because, he's a free speech absolutist, right? And I've got an article, which is, I'm a free speech absolutist, and I wrote about this. And in that, there's a quote from him saying, I don't mind getting criticised by journalists, or something like that. So I don't mind getting criticised, just don't dox me. But I'm okay being criticised by journalists. Apart from, he's not. Because what happened after that one show? In the interview, Elon claimed that I'm criticised constantly, I couldn't care less. Right after the interview, he sent Don a message that said the contract had been terminated. It seems that he actually could care less. Well, actually, that's one of those phrases that doesn't make sense, but you get the point. I just find it funny that, this man says he's a free speech absolutist, and it turns out that he just amplifies his own voice and people he likes, and anyone he doesn't like, he either cancels their show, or downgrades their content. So we know that Ukraine News is given the same coding level on Twitter as disinformation, and so it's downgraded. So if you want to find out about Ukraine News, you have to work harder to do that. Yet if you want to know about what Elon Musk is up to, it's on whenever you turn on or join Twitter, the first person you see is Elon Musk. Whenever you turn on Twitter, the first voice on your threads is Elon Musk, because he has coding to amplify his own voice. So it's not free speech. It's like free for some people, much more free for some people, and very much not free for others. So it's just really interesting that he cancelled someone as a free speech absolutist who dared to criticise Elon Musk, or just not even criticise, ask him difficult questions. He likes to cancel people, even though he's a free speech absolutist. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care. Speak soon. Toodle pips.